Rattlesnake Gulch, Arizona Territory, 1878. The summer sun beat down like God's own hammer on an anvil of dust and stone. Jake Harrow saw the smoke first, thick and black against the clear blue sky. Then came the screams. A woman's voice, high and desperate, carried on the hot wind. Without hesitation, his weathered hand dropped to the worn walnut grip of his Colt single-action army, the same revolver that had seen him through the war, and 10 long years since. 3 men dragged a struggling farmer across his own porch, while a fourth held a torch to the corner of the modest homestead. The woman fought against the grip of another man, her dress torn at the shoulder. "You had your chance, Simpson," the leader of the group shouted, his voice carrying across the dry earth. "Baron Reed ain't asking again." Jake dismounted silently, dust barely rising beneath his worn boots. His approach was measured, unhurried, the walk of a man who had faced death too many times to fear it. "Might want to reconsider." Jake's voice cut through the chaos like a knife, low, steady, with the unmistakable edge of steel. "Let them go." 5 heads turned as one. The leader, a man with a pock-marked face and dead eyes, assessed Jake with a dismissive glance. "Keep riding, stranger. This ain't your business." Jake's weathered face betrayed nothing. 10 years of war and wandering had carved away any softness that might once have lived there. All that remained was hard angles, a 3-day beard, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and unforgiving. "Made it my business when you decided to burn folks out of their homes." Jake shifted his stance slightly, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "I won't say it again." The leader nodded almost imperceptibly. 2 of his men released the farmer and moved toward Jake, hands hovering near their holsters. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. What happened next occurred with such speed and precision that later the farmer's wife would claim Jake Harrow had the devil's own blessing. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession, not drawn with flashy flourish, but with the economical movement of a man whose survival had long depended on such skills. Both men fell before their hands closed around their weapons. The leader's gun cleared leather, but Jake was already moving, diving and rolling as dust and gunpowder mixed in the air. His 3rd shot caught the leader high in the shoulder, spinning him like a top. The remaining men broke, scrambling for horses and leaving their wounded behind. Jake rose slowly, ejecting spent shells and reloading with practiced movements. Thumb flipping open the loading gate, fingers sliding fresh cartridges into the cylinder, each motion fluid and precise. "Thank you, mister," the farmer said, helping his sobbing wife to her feet. "Those are Baron Reed's men. They've been forcing folks out all over the valley." Jake's eyes narrowed at the name. Reed? Josiah Reed? His son, Baron Reed, came in about 5 years back with money from back east, buying up land for the railroad, they say, but mostly just taking what he wants. Jake holstered his weapon, the sound of metal against leather punctuating his decision. "Where can I find the sheriff?" The farmer's bitter laugh told Jake everything he needed to know. Sheriff Wilson Dobbs had grown fat on graft and whiskey. His office smelled of stale tobacco and neglect. When Jake pushed through the door, the sheriff barely looked up from his desk. "Heard there was a shooting at the Simpson place," Jake said without preamble. "And you are." Dobbs finally glanced up, eyes narrowing as they took in Jake's dust-covered form. "Jake Harrow." The name landed like a stone in still water. Recognition rippled across the sheriff's face, followed by something that might have been fear. "Thomas Harrow's boy? Thought you died in the war." "Not for lack of trying." Jake's gaze moved deliberately around the office, noting the expensive boots, the gold watch chain, the new Winchester rifle mounted on the wall. "Came back to see my brother and our family land. Finding things changed." Sheriff Dobbs shifted uncomfortably. "War changed everything, son. Your brother Sam's been working your daddy's ranch, keeping to himself mostly. And this Baron Reed? Jake's voice hardened. I find it interesting his men are burning out farmers while wearing deputy badges. The sheriff's hand moved toward the drawer of his desk. Jake's voice stopped him cold. I wouldn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Reed's got the law and money on his side, Dobbs finally said. Smart man would ride on. Pretend he never came back. Jake's smile never reached his eyes. Never much cared for being smart. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Might want to tell your boss I'm looking for him. The Harrow Ranch sat nestled against the foothills, 3 miles east of town. As Jake crested the final rise, his chest tightened. The house still stood, weathered but solid, but the corral was empty, the fields untended. Sam, Jake called, dismounting cautiously. The door creaked open, and a tall man stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely in his hands. 10 years had changed Sam Harrow from the gangly youth of Jake's memory into a man with their father's build and their mother's gentle eyes. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. Jake, God Almighty. The brothers embraced, decades of distance collapsing in an instant. Thought you were dead, Sam said, pulling back to study his older brother's face. When you stopped writing after Vicksburg, nearly was. Jake's gaze drifted to the empty fields. What happened here, Sam? Inside, over coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, Sam explained. Baron Reed had arrived 5 years earlier, buying land for the transcontinental spur line. When persuasion failed, intimidation followed. One by one, their neighbors had sold or fled. He's got the deed to half the valley now, Sam said bitterly. Forged papers, bribes to the territorial judge, sheriffs in his pocket. He's been trying to get our land too. Says it's critical for his rail line. Jake stared into his cup. Ran into some of his men today. They won't be reporting back. Sam's face paled. Jesus, Jake, you don't know what you started. But Jake knew exactly what he'd started, the same way he knew this moment had been inevitable from the day he first shouldered a rifle for the Confederacy. Some men were born to plow fields, others to build empires. Jake Harrow had been born for war. Get your things, he told his brother. We're heading into town tonight. Time to let Baron Reed know the Harrows aren't selling. They rode out as sunset painted the mountains copper and gold. Neither brother noticed the glint of brass on the distant ridge, a spyglass tracking their movement, followed by the rapid retreat of a rider toward town. The ambush came at Miller's Crossing, where the road dipped between 2 rocky outcroppings. The first shot took Jake's hat clean off. The second caught Sam in the chest. Jake dove from his horse, drawing and returning fire in one fluid motion. A man screamed from the rocks above. Sam lay in the dirt, blood spreading across his shirt like spilled wine. Hold on, brother, Jake urged, dragging Sam behind a boulder as bullets kicked up dust around them. It's bad, Jake, Sam gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. His fingers clutched at Jake's sleeve. Promise me. Save your breath. We're getting out of this. Jake fired twice more toward the hidden attackers. Sam's grip tightened with surprising strength. Promise you'll make it right. The land, it's all that's left of them. Before Jake could answer, 2 riders appeared on the road behind them. One raised a shotgun. The blast caught Jake in the side, spinning him into darkness. His last conscious thought was of Sam's hand, suddenly limp in his own. Water. Cold and insistent, slapping against his face. Jake struggled toward consciousness, each breath sending fire through his ribs. He was moving, floating. No, being carried by the current. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its kin. Strong hands dragged him from the river's edge. Through swollen eyes, Jake made out the weathered face of an old Apache, lined like the desert floor after a hard rain. The man spoke words Jake couldn't understand, then darkness claimed him again. Days passed in fever dreams. Jake fought shadowy enemies, relived battles long ended, called for his brother in the dark. The old Apache tended his wounds with poultices of herbs and mud, forced bitter teas past his cracked lips, and chanted in the firelight. When Jake finally emerged from the fever, he found himself in a small wickiup at the edge of a hidden canyon. His wounds had been dressed with strips of clean cloth, his body thin but healing. "You are stubborn," the old man said in accented English, squatting beside the fire. "Most men would have died." "Who are you?" Jake's voice was a rasp, his throat raw. "I am called Stone Face by your people." The old man gestured to his impassive features. "My band left when the White Eyes came. I stayed." "Why save me?" The Apache studied him with eyes like polished obsidian. "The river gave you to me. That means something." Jake learned later that Stoneface had been a war chief in his youth, before the reservation and the broken treaties. Now he lived alone, watching the changing land from his hidden canyon, keeping the old ways alive through solitude and memory. As Jake healed, Stoneface taught him how to move silently across rocky ground, how to read sign where others saw only dust, how to fashion a hunting knife from scavenged steel in mesquite wood, how to disappear in plain sight. "Your enemy believes you dead," Stoneface told him one evening. "That is your strength." Jake's hands never stopped working as they talked, maintaining his recovered Colt with methodical precision. Field stripping the revolver, he cleaned each part with the reverence of a priest handling sacred relics: cylinder, barrel, firing pin. His fingers traced the worn inscription on the backstrap: "Presented to Lowton J. Harrow, 4th Texas Cavalry by Captain J.S. Reed." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. The father's gift would be the son's undoing. "Reed's men patrol the valley," Stoneface said. "They drive more families away. They bring machines that tear the earth." Jake reassembled the revolver, each component sliding home with satisfying precision. "What do they want with Apache land?" "The Black Road," Stoneface replied. "The Iron Horse needs a path through sacred land. Reed builds where others fear to tread." "The railroad," of course. Baron Reed wasn't just stealing land. He was building an empire, cutting across both settler claims and Apache territory with equal disregard. Jake practiced daily, regaining his strength, shooting until his aim was true at 100 paces, tracking game through the underbrush, fighting with knife and fist and stone, each skill honed to a deadly edge. 3 months after the river had delivered him to Stoneface, Jake watched from a hidden ridge as Reed's men forced another family from their home. The father protested, reaching for a shotgun. He died in front of his children, his blood soaking into land that had once been his. That night, Jake cleaned his gun one final time. "I'm going back," he told Stoneface. The old Apache nodded, as if he'd been waiting for these words. "The bear does not forget who wounded him." "They think I'm dead." "I aim to keep that advantage as long as possible." Stoneface reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something small and gleaming: a badge, tarnished silver, partially melted on one edge. "Your brother carried this. I found it when I searched for your possessions after the river gave you to me." Jake took the tin star, its weight far greater than metal alone. Sam had been a deputy before the war. He'd kept the badge all these years. "One more thing I teach you," Stoneface said: "the Apache way of vengeance." The old warrior showed Jake a technique passed down through generations of Apache fighters: how to move between shadow and light to become practically invisible, how to use an enemy's vision against him. The ghost walk, Stoneface called it, a method of approaching so gradually that the human eye registered no movement until it was too late. "The eye sees movement, not stillness," Stoneface explained. demonstrating how to pause between each micro step, becoming part of the landscape itself. Move only when the wind moves the grass. Breathe with the earth's breath. For weeks, Jake practiced this skill until he could approach a deer close enough to touch its flank before it sensed him. This, Stoneface promised, would be his greatest advantage against a man like Reed, who relied on guns and numbers rather than the old ways of the hunt. Rattlesnake Gulch had changed in 6 months. New buildings lined the main street, a hotel with actual glass windows, an expanded saloon, offices for the Territorial Rail Company. Baron Reed's influence was everywhere, from the newly graded streets to the increased number of armed men loitering on corners. Jake entered town after midnight, face obscured by a full beard, hair longer than he'd worn it since the war. He moved like a ghost through back alleys, seeking out those he could trust. Old Man Greeley had been his father's friend. The blacksmith's shoulders had bowed with age, but his eyes still held the same fierce loyalty, Jake remembered. "Sweet Jesus," Greeley whispered when Jake stepped from the shadows of his stable. "We buried you, boy." "Seems it didn't take," Jake said. "Need your help, Mr. Greeley. Need to know who's still fighting." The list was short but determined. Simpson, whose farm Jake had saved. Williams, who had lost 2 sons to Reed's expansion. Carver, whose wife now walked with a limp after Reed's men had finished negotiating. A handful of others, farmers, ranchers, a Mexican family who owned the dry goods store. "What about the Apaches?" Jake asked. "Stoneface says Reed's cutting across their sacred land." Greeley's eyes widened. "You've been with Stoneface. Man's a legend and dangerous. But yes, Reed's pushing the rail line through Diablo Canyon. Army won't stop him because it's not reservation land, strictly speaking." Jake nodded. "Get word to everyone. Meeting tomorrow night at the old mission ruins. Tell them a ghost is calling them to arms." 20 men and 3 women gathered at the abandoned mission as a quarter moon rose above the mountains. Their faces showed equal measures of hope and skepticism as Jake outlined his plan. "Reed thinks he owns the law," Jake told them. "But he's vulnerable. His empire depends on the railroad. Without it, he's just another land grabber with too much money." Jake unrolled a crude map drawn on tanned hide. 3 targets. The supply depot here, where they store blasting powder for the tunneling operation. The payroll office here, where Reed keeps cash to pay his workers. And the main camp at Diablo Canyon, where they're cutting the rail bed through Apache land. "That's suicide," Simpson protested. "Reed has 50 hired guns. We're farmers, not soldiers." "I was a soldier," Jake replied evenly. "So was Williams. Carver rode with Quantrill. Mrs. Mendez here can shoot the eye out of a jackrabbit at 400 yards. He looked around the circle. "We don't need to beat his army. We just need to make his railroad too expensive to build." James Tucker, a rancher who'd lost his water rights to Reed's operations, stepped forward. "Count me in, Harrow. Reed's men killed my best bull last month for sport." One by one they nodded, not from courage, though there was plenty of that, but from the bone-deep certainty that they had nothing left to lose. "1 week," Jake said. "We strike in 1 week." Sheriff Dobbs found him the next day. Jake had known he would. "Town's not big enough to hide a dead man," Dobbs said, hand resting on his holster as he confronted Jake in the alley behind Greeley's smithy. "Reed's got a $1,000 bounty on your head. That why you're here?" Jake didn't reach for his weapon. "To collect?" Dobbs's jowls quivered with indignation or fear. "I came to warn you. Reed knows you're back. Knows you're planning something. He's bringing in more men from Tucson." Jake studied the sheriff, seeing not the corrupt lawmen of today, but the once decent officer who taught him to shoot when he was 12. "Why tell me this?" Dobbs looked away. "Your brother was a good man. What happened to him wasn't right. Neither was what happened to you." "Join us then," Jake said. "Help us stop Reed." The sheriff shook his head. I'm too old, too compromised, but I can give you this. He handed over a folded paper. Reed's shipping schedule. His payroll arrives tomorrow, not next week like you thought. He's moving everything up because he knows you're here. Jake took the paper, suspicion warring with necessity. Why should I trust this? Don't trust me, Dobbs said, turning to go. But that paper came from Reed's own office. Do what you want with it. The schedule changed everything. Jake gathered his core allies that night, Williams, Carver, and Mrs. Mendez. If the payroll was arriving tomorrow, they had no choice but to accelerate their plans. Could be a trap, Williams warned. Jake nodded. Almost certainly is. Question is, how do we spring it and survive? The answer came from an unexpected quarter. As they debated, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beyond their campfire. Stone face, silent as death, stepped into the light. My people will help, the old Apache said simply. The Black Road must not cut our sacred land. Dawn broke cold and clear over Rattlesnake Gulch. The town stirred slowly, unaware that today would decide its fate. The payroll wagon approached from the east, heavily guarded, 6 riders in front, 6 behind, all wearing the telltale red bandanas of Reed's men. Jake watched from the bell tower of the abandoned church, tracking their progress through a battered spyglass. The first part of the trap was obvious. Too many men for a routine payroll, their eyes too alert, weapons too ready. The second part remained hidden, but Jake could guess. Reed himself would be waiting, probably at the bank, with more men positioned to close the trap once Jake showed himself. What Reed couldn't know was that Jake had no intention of attacking the payroll directly. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the far end of town, the first signal. Williams and his sons had set fire to the lumberyard, drawing attention and men away from the bank. Jake raised his hand, signaling to Stoneface and his warriors positioned in the hills overlooking the town. A moment later, war cries echoed across the valley, followed by the sharp crack of rifles. The rear guard of the payroll escort wheeled their horses, confused by attacks from multiple directions. In the chaos, Jake descended from the bell tower and moved through back alleys toward his true objective, Reed's office. The deeds, the forged documents, the evidence of corruption that gave Reed his stranglehold on the territory, all would be there. The office was a grand affair on the second floor above the bank. Jake slipped in through a service entrance, encountering a single guard who fell silently to Stoneface's hunting knife. The filing cabinets yielded their secrets easily. Land deeds with forged signatures, correspondence with corrupt territorial judges, detailed maps of the planned railroad cutting directly through Apache burial grounds. Jake was securing the documents when the door burst open. Baron Reed was younger than Jake had expected, perhaps 35, with the manicured appearance of Eastern money and the cold eyes of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted. His pistol, an ornate Remington with pearl grips, was aimed squarely at Jake's chest. "The ghost of Jake Harrow," Reed said, his Boston accent incongruous in the frontier office. "My father spoke highly of your service to the Confederacy, said you were the best officer he'd ever seen." "Your father was a good man," Jake replied, hands carefully away from his weapon. "You're nothing like him." Reed's smile didn't touch his eyes. "My father died broke after the war, clinging to outdated notions of honor, while men like me built the future. This railroad will make me the richest man in the territory. Over stolen land and dead bodies. Progress demands sacrifice," Reed shrugged. "Your brother was too stubborn to understand that." Jake's voice hardened. "You killed the wrong Harrow." A noise from the hallway caught Reed's attention. Just a momentary distraction, but enough. Jake employed the ghost walk, his movement imperceptible as he shifted his weight forward, seeming to fade from one spot and materialize closer to Reed. The rancher's eyes widened in confusion, his aim wavering. "What the devil? Reed began. In that instant of disorientation, the door opened again. Tucker, James Tucker, who had been so eager to join their cause, stepped in, a rifle in his hands. "Got your message, Mr. Reed," Tucker said, his eyes not meeting Jake's. "Said you had Harrow cornered." Jake's stomach dropped. The betrayal Stoneface had warned might come, a spy in their midst. "Excellent timing, Tucker," Reed smiled. "Your family's debt will be forgiven as promised." What happened next occurred in heartbeats. Jake completed the ghost walk, his hand moving for his gun with preternatural stillness until the final explosive draw. Tucker swung his rifle toward Jake, but hesitated, conflicted loyalty written across his face. The shot that rang out didn't come from Jake's Colt or Tucker's rifle. It came from behind Tucker, from the small derringer in Sheriff Dobbs's trembling hand. Dobbs's shot caught Tucker in the shoulder, spinning the betrayer into the wall. Before Reed could react, Jake completed his draw, the motion so fluid it seemed to defy human limitation, and fired. Baron Reed collapsed across his own desk, blood staining the maps that had been his obsession. Tucker slid down the wall, clutching his shoulder, shame written across his face. "He had my family's mortgage," he gasped. "Said he'd take everything." Jake nodded once, understanding if not forgiving. "Get out of my sight. Don't come back to Rattlesnake Gulch." "Guess I chose a side after all," Dobbs said wearily, lowering his small pistol as Tucker stumbled out. Outside, gunfire still echoed through the town. Jake gathered the documents and moved to the window. Across the street, he could see Reed's men engaged in a firefight with the settlers and Apache warriors. The odds were even now, the element of surprise working in their favor. "What happens next?" Dobbs asked as they descended the stairs. Jake paused, the weight of the badge in his pocket suddenly heavy. "Justice. The land goes back to its rightful owners. The railroad finds another route, one that doesn't cut through people's lives." "And you?" Dobbs gestured to the sheriff's badge on his own chest. "Town needs a new lawman, someone who knows right from wrong." The question hung in the air as they stepped into the street. Jake Harrow, who had survived a war, an assassination, and the river itself, looked out over the town his father had helped build. In the distance, the mountains stood unchanged, indifferent to the brief struggles of men. "This land is in my blood," he said finally, "but I won't wear a badge again. Some men work best outside the law." 3 days later, the territorial marshal arrived to find a transformed Rattlesnake Gulch. Reed's men had fled or surrendered. The documents Jake had recovered revealed corruption reaching all the way to the territorial capital. And in the cemetery on the hill, 2 fresh graves stood side by side, Sam Harrow and Baron Reed, the final casualties of a war that had begun long before either was born. Jake declined the marshal's offer of a badge. "The law's too narrow," he explained. "Justice needs a longer reach." Instead, he rebuilt the Harrow Ranch, planted fields where his father had once worked the land. Stoneface occasionally appeared at his door, silent as ever, bringing news or simply sitting in companionable silence as the seasons turned. The railroad eventually came to Rattlesnake Gulch, but it followed a different route, one negotiated fairly, with proper compensation for the land it crossed. It skirted the sacred Apache grounds, respecting ancient boundaries older than any nation. And if travelers through the territory sometimes spoke of a tall, weathered man who appeared when homesteaders were threatened, who dispensed frontier justice with a Colt revolver and then vanished like a ghost, well, that was just another legend of the Arizona Territory, where the line between law and justice remained as dusty and indistinct as the horizon itself. 6 months after Reed's death, a stagecoach was robbed 15 miles outside of town. The passengers, including a federal judge and his wife, were left stranded but unharmed. The only items taken were documents from the judge's briefcase, papers showing another land scheme brewing in the next county. 3 days later, the would-be land grabbers were found tied to the porch of the territorial office, with evidence of their crimes neatly stacked beside them. No one saw who delivered them, though rumors spoke of a figure who moved like the wind, there and gone in the space between heartbeats. Jake Harrow had found his calling, not as a lawman bound by oaths and politics, but as something else. A ghost of justice riding the bitter edges where law failed and power corrupted. His legend grew with each passing month, becoming something larger than the man himself. Some nights, as sitting on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Jake would touch the badge he kept in his pocket, not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of the brother he'd lost and the justice he'd found. The frontier was changing, but some things remained constant: the land, the sky, and the need for men willing to stand in the shadows to protect both.